Hi. I have to start off with an apology. Basically, I went traveling, and I stopped doing the OP-1 tutorials. So the track that I was working on in the OP-1 tutorials, I actually finished when I came back, and so I'm sorry that I haven't shown you the rest of the process. All I can say is that I'll show you sort of the end result in here in Ableton Live, and in the near future I hope to start another track, and this time I will make sure I document it more thoroughly, and I'll also take into consideration the advice that I got in the comments, or the feedback that I got in the comments about the format of the tutorials. Anyways, so the OP-1 outputs the music that you write on it as if you record it into like the into the recorder on the OP-1 into like the sort of it has a vinyl graphic. That will be the Mixdown file, but then you also have access to the 4 tracks. And so the 4 tracks that you have in the tape recorder section, it will break it out into 4 stems. So what I did was I grabbed those 4 stems, and essentially I chopped it up where, because of the way that I composed it, it lent itself to that, because I could separate out different melodies, and then here in Ableton Live, for example, if we take the instrumental, the synth parts, because some of them were contiguous and not overlapping, I was able to chop them out and break them out into different tracks to add separate effects. So the intro, for example, I have track 2 is the opening melody, track 3 is the bass tone that kicks in and builds up to the start of the track. Here we have the drums. I believe that this is the sequence bass line. Maybe I'm wrong. We'll see. Let's see. Yep, that's right. That is one synth part. So these kinds of chords, here they kind of are a little bit brighter, different patch. But you can see that, so when I was composing, I would have this section here as those soft chords, and then I would have that coming from a different instrument, and I would just put the 2 next to each other. So technically, if I wanted to treat these 2 differently, I could chop, I could zoom in, chop here, and then shift that down to a new track, which is what I did here. And these parts are a different instrument. Okay. So far all of that is OP-1. No additions other than on each track I added, you can see an effects rack. So for this one, you have a phaser that playfully deals with the stereo field, a little bit of sort of saturation plugin, and dynamic tube for good measure, just to dirty it up even a little bit more. The truth is that with the OP-1, since you already have effects built in, really the treatment here is much more about the tone, less about adding, drastic changes, at least, for this track. Here I added a auto pan effect, again to just animate the stereo image. This is just the bass line. So that I left intact, in fact. I think in the OP-1 I might have used like the punch or something like that for those sounds. And then for the drums, I put in a reverb and then a multiband compressor. Oh, hang on. Yep. So they already had a very dirty character from the OP-1, so really it was more about adding a smidge of ambience and just because they were maxed out, the waveform was maxed out, I wanted to compress them a little bit so that they would sit a little bit better in the mix. And then you see here original. I actually I had recorded some guide vocals in the OP-1 for the track, which I put in here, but now I've removed because they were only guide vocals, or I was trying out different vocal ideas, and then when I recorded the vocals, I removed them. But the last track here is actually the original instrumental straight from the OP-1, so the Mixdown version from the OP-1, and I added it at a very low level, and I added an auto pan just to mess things around even more, because what I did was in the OP-1 I added a delay on the master bus, which kind of gave it a nice groove, which I haven't done here, but I kind of wanted some of that improbability, some of that unevenness to come through in the final polished version. The only thing that is not OP-1, not from the OP-1, are the vocals, which I recorded straight into the computer. And as you can see, it's quite an extensive rack. Again, some a saturator, a tube emulation, compressor, and then I EQ it. This is I run Ableton Live 8. In Live 9 they've fixed this problem. Well, it wasn't really a problem, but the EQ didn't you didn't have a spectrum analyzer, so you couldn't see how, I mean, you had to do it by ear. You had no visual reference as to how the EQ affected the final sound. So what I did is I created a rack here. Sorry, I'm kind of going off topic here. But I created a rack anyways where I paired an EQ with a spectrum analyzer so that then I could see the effect of the EQ on the frequencies. And then this is another very basic rack that I did, which is just a wet-dry rack for, there are certain, these effects have it, but there are certain effects that don't have a wet-dry knob. One that I can think of off the top of my head is the 12-bit, the bit crusher in Ableton Live doesn't have a wet-dry, so I created this wet-dry rack just for that. Also in this case it's handy because I can control the wet-dry for these two effects from one knob instead of having to set it individually. So anyways, to cut a long story short, the only non-OP-1 thing are the vocals. So without much, well, and the effects on the broken out tracks. But without any further ado, let's listen to the track.
Not so easy to let go. Not so easy to let go. When you're left in the dark. When you're left in the dark. Not so easy to let go. Not so easy to let go. When you're left in the lurch. When you're left in the lurch. Look around for what's left, 'cause it's all we got. Start your journey to the hole that you once called home. Not so easy to let go. Not so easy to let go. When you're left in the mud. When you're left